Hi guys, and welcome back to this next lesson of our series Blender for Production 2D and 3D Tracking inside of Blender. My name is Helge Maus from Pixeltrain. In this lesson we want to tackle a topic which is named plane tracking. Plane tracking is something which you can use directly inside of Blender inside the compositor, but I will also give you some advice if you are working with footage which isn't too easy to track. If you want to follow along, you can use my footage package from Gumroad or from my Patreon, but you also can use your own footage. Let's get started directly here. So I go into the VFX template to load our movie clip editor, and let's take a look into our footage. So let's dive in here. From our footage package, we have here the plane track folder. You see here this street scene with this building in the background. This is the scene I want to use. I have made an image sequence out of that, like I've explained in the first lesson. I only used frame 150 to, let's take a look here, to frame 250. So that's the image sequence we want to use. Let's load it in and make our settings like always. Go to color management, change it to standard. Then we make sure that we use 25 frames per second as a frame rate. Great. Then we set our scene frames and prefetch everything. So now everything is done. Let's go to the playback here, movie clip editor, and now we are ready to go. Let's make a little bit more space here and take a look into the footage. You see, I'm walking here on the street and I'm looking here on the left side on this sign. And what I want to do is I want to track the area of this sign to make an insert here. I want to replace this ugly advertising here with something more animal friendly. Let's talk about the problems which we have here. You can tackle that later when we talk about 3D tracking completely in 3D. So this is something I would do in production. But you also can tackle it in 2D like we want to do it here. So we can make something like a corner pin here. For that, we need an area here or definition for the corner pin later. And this is named inside of the Blender 2D tracking area, a plane track. So let's think about how to track the whole thing. You see, it's a little bit shaky. Okay, that's one thing. The other thing is that this area here through the dark green here is quite dark. So maybe it's not so easy to track this area here. And if you run later into problems with your footage, in the next lesson we dive again deeper into 2D tracking settings. We have one lesson made last week about the advanced tracking. Maybe you also need then to look into the next lesson to learn a little bit more about that, but we try to do that here. So let's go back now here. We need 4 trackers now. We can start directly here in the tracking settings to make some adjustments directly here before we generate the trackers. The first thing I want to do is I want to use the affine model here so that we have translation, rotation, scaling, and also perspective changes skewing inside of the tracking. So this can help us. Then we want to normalize the footage so that the luminance changes are equalized out. And what we also can do is I go into the correlation and go up to 90% again, because I really want to make sure that the track is solid. Okay, then we can make 4 trackers. The order is not important. We need 4 trackers and you don't need to place them exactly where your insert is. So it's really a thing about the correct depth inside of the image. So I want to place my trackers where I can see best the features. So let's take the first one here in this area, and I take here this bright area here. I place Control click this tracker now here, and you see, like I've said, the footage is not the best. You will see a little bit later that the footage also has some ugly things going on, but let's try this first. So I make this a little bit smaller. Alt S for the search area. I think that's big enough. We can test that in a moment. And to the fact that we have set here everything, our tracking settings here are set correctly. Now let's go here to real time only to make sure that it's not too fast, but you will see we run really fast into problems with that here. So we don't need to think about the whole track here. So let's make Control T and look what happens. Okay, it seems quite cool, but then it breaks here. So let's check first why it broke. And you see here, at this point here, the footage is quite blurry because here I shake the camera a lot, and so the motion blur killed here the pattern. What we can do now here is we can redefine the pattern by scaling this area here, and if you want, you also can change here the pattern area you learned in one of the first lessons, that this reference point here will not change by doing that. So it can help. Let's try again, and you see after one frame it breaks again. This is really often in such areas where you have a lot of motion blur that it doesn't work automatically anymore. So let's go one frame to the left where it was good. I scale again here to make a new keyframe, and now I press Alt right, and now look what happens. It doesn't track anymore. This is a problem I had a lot with my students, that they said, yeah, I made a keyframe here, it is there, but it doesn't track anymore. The problem here is that Blender had disabled this track here. This disable is now killing the track all the time. To see that, you have to do two things now. The first thing is I go with my arrow keys to the right, to the frame which I want to track, and you see now that the track here is red, which means it's disabled. You can enable a track again through this eye here. But be aware that at the moment you enable that, the track position is still hold from the position before, which is not correct here. What you can do now is you can press the G key and place now your tracker where it belongs here. It's a two-step process here. So if you now go back, and this is something you have now to check if, let's press the L key to stabilize the plate here, that the tracking position here is still valid. You see, this time this here doesn't help too much. It's a hard track, I told you. So you see, this looks a little bit deeper than that here. So I press the G key again. And if you are moving here and you want to slow it down, hold down the Shift key while you are doing that. And this also helps. And now I don't try to track the rest again with Control T. I know it will break. And so I hold down the Alt key and use now the right arrow on my keyboard to track only one frame. And you see it breaks again, but it's okay. I activate that here, go a little bit back. And this frame here is a really interesting one. We take a look into this frame 78 in a minute. So let's try Alt right arrows again. And now you see it seems to work again. Okay, we can go a little bit faster, and it still holds. Now you see this pattern here is now skewing here around, so let's make the area bigger again so that the tracker sees something useful here. And congratulations, we are nearly at the end, and if you have a little bit more time now at home, you will see that we started at this point here, really in the top here of the corner. Here at the end, we are now, I think, a little bit down here. So in reality, I have to bring this now up here and track backwards now. I use Alt left here to track now backwards and to override here these values. And you see it here in the curve that if I track now backwards, it changes. So it really overrides, and I try to find here a solution which is not too bad at all. Tracking takes time, and it's an art form like modeling, shading, and things like that. All together. Now we had here a keyframe. Here it is. It breaks. Wonderful. We go back here, place it here where it should belong. And now I go without tracking left and right to take a look here what happens. Everything jumps around, and here we lost it. So let's go up here a little bit more. Let's go up here. Let's go up here. And now we can try to track that over. And if you then have the feeling that it doesn't change too much anymore, then you can try to track it backwards. So let's do that. I press Command-Shift-T for backwards tracking. And you see we are now here at this point. And you see, really often, it doesn't make too much sense to try automatic tracking in such a shot. Okay, I do it now half manually. Here we go. And go over the point. Yeah, and you see this pattern area doesn't make any sense at all. Okay. Okay, done. Control L for locking. So you have seen a little bit of work, but now let's take a look. I have still my stabilization on here with L on this tracker so that I can see what happens here. Yeah, and I think now it is a good tracker for such a shot. Let's go back here and try the other side now here. So Control click here, I make it a little bit smaller. If you only want to see this track line, you can go here, show me only the selected one. And now I hold down the Alt key and step into that. And now you see it's quite fast that it loses here directly its pattern. So let's check before and after. And now we go with Alt right arrows through the shot. If you see the pattern changing too much, I normally go in here, scale a little bit this pattern here, or correct the shape of this pattern. So it's much faster than correcting all the time to go here with Alt right arrows through the shot. And then we will come here to the area 70 where we have a really strange thing going on. And I told you that something here is really crazy. What is the problem? If you go here over these frames, you suddenly see that this here is moving the plate like a jelly. You see this jelly effect here? And this is named a rolling shutter effect. At this point here, you really see that the movement was too fast for the sensor, and you get this wave going through the footage, and it's always in the same area. So I know this now and I can correct that directly here. So this is also a problem with digital cameras, that you sometimes have this problem here. Let's go over this point, correct this again. Okay, go back, go forward, only to make sure that it's not too bad here. And after some frames, it should work again. Yeah, now it works again. Let's correct the pattern so that's a little bit easier to go through. And congratulations, you are through 2 trackers. So let's take the next one. And now you see this here is quite dark, this area here. And what you now can do is you can try to find a different pattern here. We can say, okay, this here is really obvious. So what we can do is we make this pattern bigger here. The green area doesn't bring anything to our result. You see, everything here is green. but we can try to capture this area here. So let's try it. Again, after the third frame, like the area before. Now you know how to do that. I go up here, place it, and always check with your arrow keys that you are still having something useful. And now we can go through. This is a good practice if you have nice music going on. Okay, now we are in the area 70, and I think we had from this point on a little drift. There's another thing which I want to show you here. It's the E key on your keyboard. The E key brings up the tracking pie menu. So the most important tracking commands are here, and so we can clear the path to the right, only to make sure that everything is nice and tidy here. And this will also help the E key if you're, for example, now in full screen. So if you press Command Spacebar, you have now more space here to work. But if you now are looking for tracking commands, you can use that here directly. Okay, let's go farther. Okay, we lost it. We go back here. One frame to the side. We have to activate it again. And you can place it here. Let's test. Okay. I think we are drifting a little bit here in this area. So let's go a little bit to the right. Okay. And then track it to the end and lock it again. Okay. Now we have 3 of them. And the last one is here. And for this, maybe we use this dot here. So this dot here looks nice, so that we can track it quite easily. So let's track this guy. Now we come into our jelly area. And that's it. Now we have all 4 trackers here. You have seen how to correct some of these. And the next thing, which is now important, is that you really take a look into these if they are really fitting here. Sometimes you will see, if you have all curves open here, that between the curves we have a little bit of difference, and that's absolutely natural because we have different positions in space here. But if one tracker is making a really different curve, this is always a good indicator here to select it and to check which tracker is making the problem. So if you now see here, for example, this here seems to be tracker number 1, right? And if tracker number 1 now really makes a jump here, you see here, this can tell me here that it's drifting. That's the way you can read these curves here. But I think that's enough here for the tracking of these 4 points. Let's now take a look into the plane tracking. Like I've told you, you need 4 points for that, but you also see that I don't need exactly here the area which I want to use for the insert. So let's define a plane. You go for this to the solve area here, and in the solve area here, hidden over this big solve area, there's the plane track. And this is something you have to generate. For this, you assign trackers. Like I've said, you need 4 of them. So I press the A key to select all 4 of them. If you have more trackers in the scene, you can select them. With hold down Shift key, select them so that you have a minimum of 4. You click here, create a plane track. And what now happens are 2 things. The first thing is that you see now this widget here. And this widget is the plane which you now define. So you see that we have at the corners here little handles which you now can use to place exactly what you want to do. And the next thing which has happened is here under the track itself, we have here also a plane track area, and this is not the same. So in this area here, we have now the name of this plane track. And we say, for example, this is our add, which we want to replace. So I say add replace here at this point. And what I now can do is I want to define now here the thing correctly. And to do that, I want to get rid here of the trackers. They are a little bit distracting for me. So let's go to the clip display. And I want to get rid of the pattern and also the trails, which is path. And now we can start placing here this plane here inside of that here. Okay, now we see. Maybe that's good here. You can try that later a little bit nicer than I do here in this tutorial. Maybe this is here and this is here. And the interesting thing now is, if you now press play, you will see that this plane now is moving in your plate. Why? Because this plane here is now moved with the help of the trackers and the four corners. It's sometimes a little bit hard to check if that's now really holding up. If you now scrub through, maybe you see suddenly an area where this plane is off. This means normally that your trackers or even one tracker is off. So go then back and check your tracker. If you have changed it, really often it happens that you deselect, or let's go here to the trackers, I demonstrate that. So you select this guy here, do something, and then suddenly you say, yeah, I want to correct this thing again. You can click here the white lines to highlight this plane track again. What also is possible, and this is something you also have to keep in mind, is that you have more than one plane track. So you can create them here, and that's the reason why there's a name, but I haven't found yet a list where you have all the plane tracks. So you always can select them to get the right one here. I normally make a nice naming here so that I'm really sure that I'm working on the right one. And like I've said, if you want to correct now the corners, get rid of the markers here. So let's say this here is okay. If you need now to animate something or so, there's also an auto keyframe mode here. So you can keyframe your plane or corners of the plane because you maybe have no data at this point or you really want to change them. But the question is, why do I want to do that? Let's take a look. You have here the ability to load now something into that. You also can generate something new here, but if you click that, you see you have a new image dialog, which you have the same like in painting or so. And I don't want to do that, so escape key. Instead of that, I go now to open, and I prepared my trainings data inside of the footage here to insert textures. One is this checker map, and the other one is later my new advertising animal friendly. So let's take first this checker map here and put it in. So now you see how this looks, and to really test if this thing is sliding and so, you can go here and change the opacity. This is one way of working here, so that you really can check the whole thing here if you think that this is really over your ad. And then, if you're sure, if you're happy with that, let's remove that. We can now use the data, and this is something we do in the compositor. So let's save that first, only to make sure that nothing happens here. Okay, and then switch to the compositing view. We've used that before, so quite easy. Use nodes, get rid of the render layers, composite is here. And now we need our movie clip again. So Shift A for the add menu, inputs. This time we need a movie clip. And the movie clip we need is this sign replacement here. and I have the node wrangler active. Control Shift click here. If this is new to you, I refer to the tutorials which were before this one here. I explained everything there. And if you want to learn more about the compositor, you can go into my Blender for Production, the Blender Compositor, which is also here on YouTube and free for you. I want to get rid of this backdrop here, which is a little bit ugly. So let's split the window on the left here and make an image editor out of that. Then inside of the image editor, I load now the viewer node, and look at that. We have now a nice viewer, and the distracting backdrop can be removed. Let's check that here first. So what we have here now is our original plate, like we had it before. Great. And what we now want to do is we want to place our image here. So let's take our image, Shift A. We go here into inputs, and the image is loaded by an image node. So let's go here, image node. We have the checkerboard from before here. So let's test this first, and then we do the later image. And now to place it over this original movie clip, we need a special color node, which is named an alpha over. Alpha over means we over an image, over another one, and we use the alpha of this image for that. So in the alpha over node, we have two input slots, and this is important. The background comes into the first slot, and everything which you do on top of that is the second slot. So it's a little bit around for your head. So this here would be now something like that. We have a background here, and then we have an over of a white color, and this is the factor. So if you remove the factor, you see this is the mix which we get. We don't want to have a white color, we want to use this checkerboard, so we plug it in here, and now we see the checkerboard on top of the image here. But what we now need is we want the corner pin, or better to say, a transformation which moves or transforms now this image here exactly to the insert. So for this, Shift A again, we go to the distortion nodes, and we can use here the corner pin. No, corner pin is something we have to define. You see, we have here positions. So what we need is distortion, a plane track deform, which is a corner pin which is automatically correct for us. How do we use that? To corner pin something with the plane track deform, we have to place it into the right stream, and this is the image which we want to distort. So we place it here into this stream here. Now the image is gone because we don't have any data. So we go here now to the movie clip, which is linked, and this is our sign replacement movie clip. And this is now the thing we want to use. The next thing we need here is our camera, and then there is the data stored. And then we need now the plane track. We only have one, which is named add replace. And I told you, you can have more than one in the whole system, so you can place it now here. And now you see the image is now placed exactly like we had it here. So if you load that here, you see exactly the same thing. So this here again, like we had it before with the stabilization, is only a preview for making the right settings, for naming the thing, for keyframing the thing, but the result later is then made in the compositor. Now it's placed here correctly, looks good for me. And if we want to write that now out, we have to hook up here the composite node, because this is the official output, or you can use here a file output node if you like, but I use the official output. So I save that, and let's make a really fast preview first, and then we go a little bit deeper. So I go now here into my output settings. Under output, I define now a path. Let's do it on the desktop, and we say this is preview, and we use here as a file format FFmpeg. In the FFmpeg, we can make now videos, and you see there are a lot of settings. Fastest way for this tutorial is click here to the presets and say I want to have an H264, so MP4 format. That's it. And now we go here to render animation, and wait for a moment, because now Blender is generating our final output. Okay, our file is written out, so let's check that. So I go now here to my desktop. We see now here this preview video, and let's check that. I press play, you see it seems to stay here where it belongs. Okay, but some things are now quite wrong. One thing is that this image here is squeezed because the image was 16:9 and this here is not 16:9. This is one thing. Another thing is, if you now take a look here into frames where we have much movement, like this frame here, you will see that we have a good amount of motion blur everything, but this here is still crisp and sharp. And this is a problem. This here is not a compositing tutorial. So there are a lot more things to consider. For example, which blacks you have, which whites you have, the depth of field, the grain, or the artifacts, and so on. But a little bit correcting would be great. And to do that, we have some tools directly here. First things first, I don't want to use this checkerboard. What I now want to do is I want to load this insert here. And you see, this has a different format, which I prepared before. What I have done is I opened in an image editing program, like for example, Affinity Photo or GIMP or whatever you use, one of these frames. And then I cutted out this area here and I took a look which format it has. And then I used this format here for the insert. This is the first step. Next step now is that we now can add here a little bit of a color correction. Like I've said, it's not a compositing tutorial, so I moved that here to the side. Let's add a really simple compositing node here for that. Let's take, for example, an exposure node, and I hold down the shift key to have it slower here. The exposure here down so that it fits a little bit better into the scene. And like I've said, normally things which you do is you match the blacks here, you match the whites, and you blur it and things like that. So that's not the topic today, but what you also can do now is inside of the plane track deform, you have a motion blur option. And like I've said, in areas where you move a lot, and now we search for something like that. So let's take a look here, make it bigger. For example, here, you now can go in here and activate the motion blur. It takes a while, and then you suddenly see that this here is blurred. This is not only blurred, it's motion blurred. So Blender knows the direction of the movement of the plate, and this is now the blur for that. But the amount of blur is something you have to figure out. So it's good to compare now this here with the surrounding, because this here should be blurred exactly the same, or this here like this here. You have two settings for that. The shutter here tells you how strong the motion blur is, because this shutter is set to 0.5, which means you open your shutter half of the time of the frame. If you increase that value, for example, to 75%, you are opening more and you get a more blurry result. You see it here. If you say this is too much, you have to say I have to close the shutter earlier. So it's a faster shutter, for example, 0.25. And if you now compare that here, you maybe see, yeah, this maybe is the right one, or 0.3. And the quality of the motion blur is set here through the samples. So if you have less samples, you will see double images. One means you don't have a second sample, so you don't have motion blur at all. If you do, then you maybe see a ghost image, and so on. The more samples you have, the better result also in fast movement is done, but it takes longer to render. So that's it. I hope this helps you now to make something like that here, and this is a good beginning. If you have questions about this workflow here, please write them into the comments. If you like this tutorial, please subscribe, give me a thumbs up. I hope to see you next week for the next lesson. Your Helge Maus.